Listen. This is my grandfather playing his own music over 100 years ago. His name was Gustav Mahler. Since then, the world has changed beyond his wildest imagination. But people are still the same. We live, we love, we dream, we die. We still ask ourselves, who are we? Why are we here? Where will we go after we die? These questions resonate in my grandfather's music. Everyone can understand his music because it embraces past, present, and future, the human condition between birth and death, and beyond. He composed for people of his own time, but also for us and those of the future. A symphony, he said, must be like the world. It must contain everything. And this is how my grandfather wrote his music. Welcome to his universe. Welcome to the world of Gustav Mahler. Since his childhood, my grandfather is fascinated by the voices and forces of nature. The mountains, the lakes, the flowers, the forests, the animals. They all seem to tell him stories, secrets, and sometimes even a joke.
There is a story of the Niagara Falls, which he visited once. There's a little tunnel, you can go into the tunnel, and then in front of your face, the water falls down. It's incredibly loud. I was there myself. It's very loud, and Mahler apparently went into the tunnel, came back, and he said, "Finally, forte."
Nature is a mystery, writes my grandfather, divine and infinite, and he listens to it intensely. As a little boy growing up in a Moravian town, as a young music student in Vienna, and as a conductor on his way to fame, nature confronts my grandfather with beauty and suffering, with life and death. He cannot escape it. He could connect to the immensity of nature and beyond. It came straight into him, and so he was connected to this. And he didn't shut it off in fear and whatever. He opened himself, and he just lived through it. My grandfather, halfway into his 30s, decides that he wants to capture the essence of nature in a new symphony. He works in Hamburg. There, Mahler conducts well over 100 concerts and operas during the 9 months of the season. In his personal life, he encounters defeat and victory. His brother Otto commits suicide. My grandfather falls in love with the beautiful soprano Anna von Mildenburg. To her, he reveals his ambitious plans for the Third Symphony, a work that mirrors the entire world, he writes. He feels that he is only an instrument upon which the universe plays.
He was very attuned to his environment, in particular the sounds of nature and the feeling of nature, the presence of nature. He once said, "What just Mozart is called a singer of love, I, with respectful distance, would like to be known as a singer of nature."
In the countryside around Steinbach, he finds the inspiration to compose. In the same year Mahler finishes the Third Symphony, 1896, a Swedish scientist, Svante Arrhenius, writes the first climate study in history. Car builder Henry Ford does not know about the devastating influence of carbon dioxide. He puts America on wheels. Nature strikes. A tornado destroys downtown St. Louis. Far from crowded cities, along the quiet banks of the Attersee, my grandfather tries to paint a musical image of nature. The Third Symphony, he believes, will be something the world has never heard before.
The Third Symphony for me is like a giant canvas.
Probably the largest palette of the naive, childish Mahler, who looks around the world and everywhere has a naive pleasure of what he sees.
He begins with the essence of the beginnings of life and the various stages of existence that emerge from it. So the first movement was the creation of life, the second movement was about the flowers in the meadow, the third movement was about the animals in the forest, the fourth movement is about humanity, the fifth movement was about the angels, and the sixth and last movement was about love, or as you said in a letter, I could have called it what God tells me.
It starts with this very decisive kind of beginning. All the horn section starts together, and so on. And then after a very dramatic section of the beginning, very rhythmical, very slow march, and something very ominous in the atmosphere, then comes this section, which is exactly the opposite. It's very light, and all of a sudden, it's so full of color, and the strings are playing these very soft trills and going up and down. And there's something so, I don't know, it's really difficult to put it into words, but there's something out of this world, almost.
Everyone thinks of nature as this idyllic place, but in fact it has a power that is absolutely overwhelming. It's Dionysian, he says. It's this incredible force that overwhelms us, and that's what he's trying to capture here.
An ancient world of millions of years ago, where there are various creatures coming in and out, among them like a huge dinosaur. There is this big trombone solo, huge and also very emotional and very lyrical. I always think this is some kind of Jurassic Park.
My grandfather compares his symphonies to a journey of a character. In his Third Symphony, the hero listens to the heartbeat of the earth and the universe, and he asks himself, what can mankind do?
I think that the symphony is telling us not to wait around to be led, but that we have to step out, that we have to do things that we want done on this earth, that we have to be the light that we want to see, that we want to feel, that we want to experience.
Mahler needed his peace and quiet to write music. So in the 1890s, he found a place in Upper Austria where he had a little hut built down by the lake so he could be completely isolated and surrounded by nature. He arrived in early June 1895 and was so looking forward to writing his next symphony that the first few days of his arrival were filled with this piece of music that kept going through his head. In fact, his hand hurt. He wrote so quickly. He tried to keep up with the ideas as they were coming. And within a few days, he had already finished what would become the second movement of the Third Symphony. must just imagine his house, his little hut there, surrounded by the flowers in the meadow. So he was literally, in his contact with nature, bringing all of that to bear, so to speak, into the creative process, and creating for him what was a representation or an embodiment even of that scene.
Apart from nature, literature is an important source of inspiration for my grandfather. Especially one book of old folk poems fascinates him, Des Knaben Wunderhorn, and he returns to it again and again, also in his third symphony.
The third movement of the Third Symphony, he subtitled What the Animals in the Forest Tell Me. And it begins with an innocent-sounding theme, bum-ba-da-dum, which is far from innocent. It's another folk song idea that he's adapted from Des Knaben Wunderhorn. It's based on a song called Ablösung im Sommer, which means the changing of the guard in summer. And it's ostensibly about a conversation that the animals are having about the death of the cuckoo. And the cuckoo has fallen to its death. Now what should we do? And they say, no worries, the nightingale will take care of that. The nightingale will make us all feel happy.
And then suddenly you have this sound of the post horn.
Horses, a little cart, a carriage, and then the postman with his horn sitting on there. And he stops somewhere where a colleague of his is buried. And near the grave, he plays his horn, and he has a feeling, it's not realistic, of course, he has a feeling that the dead colleague answers.
Suddenly time freezes, and it's a very dramatic moment.
What is this event doing in the middle of the animal movement? What do they have to do with one another? Again, it's the contrast between the animal and the human perspective, between views of death in the nature and views of death in the human sphere. The animals don't care about the fallen cuckoo. They care about who's going to entertain us. The postilion cares about his fallen comrade.
And when one stands up to sing O Mensch and the tiefe, tiefe Nacht, having us to understand that the night and the day are so very different, and that as people, we go so deeply into the night, so deeply into those places. And thank goodness there is light. Otherwise, how would we manage?
The fourth movement is based on a text by Friedrich Nietzsche from Also sprach Zarathustra, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It's the poem that Zarathustra recites between the striking of the bells at midnight. And it's a reflection on life, its meaning, how to make sense of why we're here.
He says that pain is deep, but pain is also easy because pain is all right. We die and then we have no more pain. But love and lust and pleasure is difficult to leave. It's more painful. The real pain is lust, because we hold on to it and it doesn't work.
Oh, Mensch, oh, men, oh, people, oh, men. But the harmony is the magic. And then with the same two notes, different harmony. This is the secret of the music, of course. And this is the reason it feels so deep and so mysterious. It's just underneath the things are changing.
O Mensch, gib acht. If only we would do that. If only we could.
In the fifth movement, the Song of Little Angels takes us to heaven. But what about the earth? In cities where my grandfather conducts, he inhales the bad breath of human progress. He sees how mankind slowly but surely alienates itself from nature. His third symphony raises questions about our bond with the planet we live on. What does nature mean to us nowadays?
We live in cities rather than in like forests and things. But like with the trees all around here, like it reminds me that we're still part of nature. Like we're still on this planet and the entire planet is nature. And that's kind of what life is then. Without the nature, we don't exactly exist.
It brings you back to your true self, the true self which is in all of us. And we forget that because we're just surrounded by chaos. So to come to the deep stillness in a person, you've got to connect to nature.
If I find like birds, then it's kind of like seeing a person. Like it's just another thing that's living here.
Doesn't it sound like a lullaby that our mothers would sing to us when we are a child? It's so full of love.
Mahler called this movement What Love Tells Me, and he meant this in the purest, highest form, agape, caritas are other terms for this, the notion not of a physical earthly love, but a type of all-forgiving love from the highest source.
There is something really, again, out of this world in a sense, but very much in this world and very much inside and something that everybody can share together.
This really makes me feel like what a joy to wake up every day to feel like music is as important to me as eating, sleeping, drinking. This melody is such, all-embracing.
All of what we've been talking about throughout the symphony is about love. And that if we had that thing, then other things might more easily come to us. That we might be more easily comfortable with life, knowing that if we can have that as our background music, that we will be better as people, and certainly better for people.